What am I here for? We're in Exodus chapter 19, trying to answer that question as we've been moving through the Bible. Got to tell you a story. After Vanderbilt, graduated with an engineering degree. Went out, did my interviews. Becky and I were going to move from Nashville, Tennessee, to Columbus, Ohio. I'd gotten a job with Honeywell. Great job. We were thinking that was the way it was going to go. And then somehow God called me in a different direction, and I had to drag Becky with me to St. Louis, Missouri. We trained here for a year, and then we moved to a foreign land, Hartford, Connecticut. Okay? And we were up in Connecticut for 8 years with a church planting up in Connecticut. Well, when I got up there, I was working vocationally. That was in about August of 1983. In December, she is 8.5 months pregnant. Our firstborn was born on December 21st, 1983. This was somewhere around the middle of December. And I come to her and I said, honey, I'm going to go into full-time ministry. Okay, we won't have insurance. We won't have any income. We're going to change directions. I'm going to do a pivot. We're going to do this. I just felt called to do this. Life is unexpected that way, isn't it? It throws some curves at us, and she was willing to go along with it. Now, I was so scared to tell her that I brought another brother from church with me because I thought she could end up killing me, and there ought to be a witness, okay, to all of this. And the Lord blessed that, and we got our support, and as about January of that following year, God honored it, and all was good. But life is filled with unexpected things, where we're changed in our direction. We've got to kind of reevaluate what our purpose is about and what we're trying to do. Well, I want you to imagine with me for just a moment the passage that was just read by Leon, and you imagine these people that were slaves in Egypt, slaves, being set free, wandering around in the desert. Can you imagine their confusion about who are we and what are we up to? And while it wasn't a very good life in Egypt, at least it was somewhat predictable. And now it wasn't even that. And so now they're at the base of Mount Sinai after wandering around for a while. And at the base of Mount Sinai, Moses is commanded to tell the people, look, I've got some things to say to you. Put up verse 4, 9:4. Past grace, well, we'll put that up. We'll show that for just a second. Past grace is the way it is in Exodus 19:4. That is, he says something like this. You yourselves have seen what I did, the way I carried you on eagle's wings. You see, God always initiates His grace into our lives. Think about your own life. He does it with Adam and Eve. He's the first mover. He does it with Abraham. It's his call. He does it with Noah. He does it in the Exodus and leading them out of Egypt. And in fact, the first 18 chapters of the book of Exodus are about how God is initiating in the lives of these former slaves. But now we get to Exodus chapter 19, and there is the response. And in that, so there's past grace, and then there's future grace. And if you look in the text, he says one little phrase. He says, this whole world is mine. Would those slaves who have seen how the gods worked in Egypt and have understood this great empire of Egypt had any idea that this God of the Israelites was a God of the whole world? we almost take it for granted. We read Genesis chapter 1 and we understand God created the whole world. That's kind of assumed in our thinking. The Israelites, they're discovering this, that our God isn't simply a local God, but a God for the whole world. So that's the reason for the future grace, because they're being called to be this light to all the nations to help them see that this God is the one universal God. But what I want to focus on for just a minute is the present grace. And this is in Exodus 19 and 6. And you can go back and read this in a little more detail, if you will, this week and see the past grace and the future grace and now the present grace in the text. But on account of time, we'll just look at this one verse. And you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And these are the words you, Moses, are to speak to the Israelites. Now let's see if we can put ourselves in their shoes again. There were slaves. They were in this Egyptian bondage. God acts. It sets them free. They are now wandering around the desert. They have no home. They don't know where their next meal is coming from. They do not have a land at this time. They do not have jobs. Their family isn't settled. Their life is chaotic by that account. And in the midst of that, with all of that upheaval, God says, I want you to be, for me, a nation of priests. And they're going, what? Priests? All of us? Now, they might have experienced priests and priestesses in the Egyptian gods in Egypt, so they would have understood the concept, but even their understanding of what a priest was about, for instance, you remember Aaron in the Old Testament is a priest, and we have the Levites that come along and are called to be of the priestly tribe. This is all in the future. But here in this passage, while on the base of this hill, mountain, you are all called to be priests. That's like unexpected. That's like changing directions. Now, what comes to mind when you think of priests? Some of you might think of Priest Holmes. He was the running back for the Kansas City Chiefs for quite a few years. Okay, I don't know. Is that what you thought of? Maybe some of you think in terms of Catholic priests. We might associate it with Catholicism. Maybe when we think of priests, we think of certain kinds of clothes, like vestments you wear, a priest wears. Well, in the text, it's as simple as this. Priests were set apart for this special calling from God, this special function. But what I want us to see then this morning is it wasn't just Israel that was called to be this nation of priests. It's us. Read, Jeannie, 1 Peter 2. Thank you. Wonderful work back there. You. This is in the New Testament. This is for New Testament believers. This is after the coming of Christ. As Peter writes, he says, you are a chosen people. You're a royal priesthood. You're a holy nation. You're God's special possession. That you may declare the praises of Him who called you out of darkness into His wonderful light. That's the function of the priests and the priestesses, or the priesthood of believers, is to declare God's praises. Exodus 19, so that all the world might know that there is one true God. How comfortable are you wearing that title, priest? I think more accurately, maybe more so than any of us as individual priests, we would say collectively we are a priesthood, to be accurate with the New Testament language. But I want us to think about just a couple of things. What does a priest do? What does a priest do? First of all, a priest represents the people to God. Okay? He intercedes. And so we think of a passage that's in my notes here. There it is. Vertical kind of relationship of Romans chapter 12 and verse 1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. This is what a priest does. He makes sacrifices that will be pleasing to God. This is what the royal priesthood does. This is our true and proper worship. Let's think of another passage, Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 15. Through Jesus, therefore, let us continually to offer to God a sacrifice of praise. What we're doing this morning, as we're expressing and lifting up God with our lives, the fruit of lips that openly profess His name. We're functioning as priests to God. Secondly, the priest represents God to the people. That is, there is a horizontal piece to this. For instance, just a little bit later in our Bible, we remember Aaron. Aaron is one who is called to be the priest for the people of Israel in a very, very specific calling and specific way. And remember what Aaron does in Numbers chapter 6 and verse 22. The Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron and his sons, this is how you are to bless the Israelites. Say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you, and the Lord make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you, and the Lord turn His face toward you and give you peace. And so they will put my name on the Israelites, and I will bless them. Would that, how would that be? Could you wear that calling to be that kind of blessing in the lives of other people, just as Aaron was? In the mid-1960s, actor Leonard Nimoy, who was raised in a traditional Jewish home, was attending Orthodox services, and he peeked out from under his father's prayer shawl, and he saw the priests in the Jewish synagogue as they were praying a prayer of blessing for the congregation. And he saw the gesture of blessing, which looks like this. Okay? So here's the gesture of blessing as the priests were praying for the congregation. And many years later, when introducing the character of Spock on Star Trek, he and the series creator, Gene Roddenberry, thought a physical sign would go along with the verbal sign, live long and prosper, that greeting. And they took the Jewish priestly gesture and it became a part of the Star Trek lore. So we have the single-handed version of the Vulcan salute to this day. But my point being, priests bless the lives of other people. Like Israel, this is what we are called to do with our lives.